Subscribe and press the bell icon so you never miss an update from Prep Ladder.
Now moving on to in our rapid revision series on some of the topics which we have studied with respect to India physical geography. So let us very quickly revise what we have studied here. So first we have studied the general introduction with respect to India. So we have seen that if you talk about India, India stretches between latitude 88 degree and 4 minutes north to 37 degrees 6 minutes north latitude, and longitude 68 degrees 7 minutes east to 97 degrees 25 minutes east. So some factual details about India you should always remember. It extends from north to south, its extent is 3214 kilometer, and from east to west it is almost 2933 kilometer. Its total frontier, if you talk about, is over 15,000 kilometer, and the total length of the coastline including the islands is over 7,000, that is 7,517 kilometer. Also we know that India shares boundary with number of countries. So the largest boundary, if you talk about, is shared with Bangladesh. Then the second longest is China, Pakistan, Nepal, Myanmar, Bhutan and Afghanistan. So these are the 7 countries with which India shares its boundary with. So also you should remember these factual details. For example, they can ask you many times, UPSC has asked such questions. So India it is the state of Jammu and Kashmir which shares boundary with Afghanistan. Bangladesh shares boundary with Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura and West Bengal. So you can see that if you talk about Bangladesh, it is sharing with West Bengal, Sikkim, if you talk about, then Meghalaya, Assam, Tripura, all of these it is sharing the boundary with. So how many total? 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 states it is sharing boundary with. Then if you talk about Bhutan, so Bhutan is sharing boundary with Sikkim, West Bengal, Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. So there are total 4 states with it which it is sharing boundary with. Then if you look into China, China shares boundary with the new UT which is formed, Ladakh. It is sharing boundary with, it shares boundary with Himachal Pradesh. It is sharing boundary, if you talk about, with your Uttarakhand. It shares boundary with Sikkim. It is sharing boundary with Arunachal Pradesh. So in total 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay. Then if you talk about Myanmar, Myanmar is sharing boundary with Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram. So these 4 states Myanmar is essentially sharing boundary with. Nepal, if you talk about, it shares boundary with Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal and Sikkim. So in total it is sharing boundary with again 5 states. Then if you talk about Pakistan, shares boundary with Gujarat, Rajasthan, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, and if you take Ladakh as a union territory separately, then again another one. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So normally it is 4 if you take Jammu and Kashmir as single, although now we know it is divided into 2 parts. So that is the border of Indian states with the neighboring countries. So that is what you have to remember. We have seen that India can be divided into 4 major physiographic divisions: Himalayas to the north, northern plains south of it, peninsular plateau further south, and also presence of islands of India. And again they have different relief. So first we talk about the relief of the peninsula. We have already seen that peninsula was formed by merger of several cratons. In total we have talked about that there was 4 cratons seem to have, it seems to have that 4 cratons have essentially formed the Indian peninsula. And if you talk about one of these which we have seen is the Bundelkhand craton. Other, if you talk about, is the Singhbhum craton. There is Bastar craton and there is Dharwad. So these are the old continental blocks which collided to essentially form the Indian peninsula, and their boundaries is represented by the rift valleys of Narmada Tapi, Son, Damodar, Mahanadi and Godavari. Okay, so that is basically, we have already talked about how it is formed. In prelims, I don't think they will ask with respect to the formation. However, they can definitely ask you, for example, in India, you find that there is a all India water divide which is represented by the presence of these mountains, that is the Aravalli, along with the Vindhyas, which becomes essentially your the Satpuras, which essentially becomes or merges to the Western Ghats. So there is an all India water divide, if you talk about, which is formed by these, if you talk about the mountains which are part of India. And again, if we talk about number of features we have seen, so one important feature we have seen in the northwestern part of the peninsula is Aravalli. We have seen that it is an old fold mountain which has been formed in two stages. One was around 2.1 billion years ago and second was around 700 million years ago, which is referred to as Delhi orogeny as well. So this is the reason why Aravalli, despite being the oldest mountain present on the earth, they are still mountainous and still present. They are also, we remember we talked about them, they are also relict mountain, because what has happened, lots of erosion has taken place, and the present Aravallis which are there, they are mainly relict of what was the old Aravalli. Also, we know that the southern part of Aravalli is higher, okay, and here there is presence of a batholith by and here it is actually, it is represented in the Abu Hills. Although average height of the Aravallis is 400 to 600 meters, it is in the southern part, in the Abu Hill region, there is the highest peak of Aravalli, Mount Guru Shikhar, is located. So in general, southern part is broader and higher, which due to which we have seen that it receives greater amount of precipitation, and thus it is also forested. As the Aravallis move toward north, their altitude is declining and they are also becoming narrow. Further north, they are divided into fan-shaped ridges which reach up to the Haryana plains up till Ambala and break the monotonicity of the plains. So that is the case of Aravalli, and Aravalli range, here lies the Mount Guru Shikhar. Okay, so I have covered, I will be covering in fact in all these things. Also there is some mapping, Indian mapping is there. So many of these important features I will cover in the map. Then if you talk about, there is Malwa Plateau. So if you talk about the Malwa Plateau, is essentially, where is first of all location of the Malwa Plateau? So you can see that it is sandwiched between the Aravalli range on one side, Bundelkhand and the Vindhyan. So it is sandwiched between all these features. So this is the Malwa Plateau. So Malwa Plateau, part of it is lying in Rajasthan, majorly it is lying in, you can see, Madhya Pradesh, and also a little bit extending to, if you talk about Uttar Pradesh, but mainly it is in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh it is actually. So if you talk about, if you talk about the case of Malwa Plateau, the important things we have to remember, Malwa Plateau, I have told you that it was formed from the same Maharashtra Plateau reunion hotspot volcanism which occurred, and the magma was very hot and fluid, and thus it was able to flow to very great distances, reaching far north, leading to the formation of the Malwa Plateau. Okay, so same process has led to formation of Malwa Plateau as the Maharashtra Plateau. General, if you talk about slope, it slopes towards north, and the average elevation in south is around 600 meter, north it is 400 meter. The river Chambal and its tributaries are flowing from here, and they have done differential erosion leading to formation of badland topography, where we have seen numerous gullies and ravines are essentially found. But despite all these problems of Malwa Plateau, one thing is very clear, it has volcanic soil, so the soil is very fertile, and because it is sandwiched between very hard rocks of Aravalli, Vindhyas and the Bundelkhand, it is an important area of human agglomeration. So we have seen that Bundelkhand, we know that it is an old plateau, very old plateau, we just now talked about this very old plateau. So it is hard and crystalline It has structure mainly made up of granite and gneiss. The average height of it is around 300 to 600 meters. It also slopes northward into the Yamuna basin. So you see, this is where Bundelkhand is there. So can you see the some of the rivers like Sindh, Betwa, Kane, all of these are essentially draining towards Yamuna river in this Bundelkhand region. So that is basically the case of Bundelkhand. Then comes the Vindhyan escarpments. So Vindhyan, as the name suggests, they are escarpments. I have told you escarpment is a feature in which one slope is gentle while the other slope, if you talk about, is steeper. So this is the escarpment which is present. So Vindhyan mountains are essentially what? Escarpment. Okay. So they have been formed because what has happened? There is the Narmada Rift Valley towards their south. So from the southern part, they look tall. They are not very tall. They look tall like mountains. So their southern slope is very steep while the northern slope is comparatively gentle slope. Okay, so they are looking tall due to presence of Narmada fault to their south. Their average elevation is just 600 to 700 meters. Some places they can reach up to 900 meters. They are essentially arc-shaped mountains, and primarily they are sedimentary rocks which have been metamorphosed. So sandstone and marble particularly are the rocks which are present here, and they are gently sloping towards north, and southern slope is scarp face or very steep face. Okay, so you can see this is basically the Vindhyan range, and several parts of Vindhya, if you remember, we have seen this Bhandar plateau is part of Vindhya. The Kaimur hills is also essentially part of the Vindhyan range. Okay, so all of these are part of Vindhyan range. In fact, here also there is, they become very broad. Here they are referred to as the Rohtas plateau. So that is actually also part of the Vindhyan range. So that is the case of Vindhyas. Then coming to Satpura, we know that Satpura is a old fold mountain which was formed in very old period between 2 to 1.9 billion years ago, and presently the height is essentially related because it is like a block mountain, because here it is lying your Satpura, and to the north of this lies Narmada fault, and to the south of this lies the Tapi fault line. So because of that they look very, very tall, and that is because they are block mountains. Their average elevation is just, however, 900 to 1000 meters. And Dhupgarh, if you talk about, which is located in the Mahadev Hills, is the highest peak of, if you talk about, the Satpura range. Okay, so you can see this is essentially the Satpura range. So you can see here this part of Satpura which extends into Gujarat, this is referred to as the Rajpipla hills. Then there is main Satpura, and parts of the Satpura, can you see there is Gavilgarh hills, these are part of Satpura range. Mahadev hills, here if you talk about, is the Dhupgarh essentially lies. So Mahadev hills is part of the Satpura range. Also, if as they go towards south, I am saying east, there is Maikal range which is also extension of the Satpura range. Okay, in fact this Maikal in their east they become broad, can you see, like a plateau. So this is referred to as the Amarkantak plateau. So Amarkantak plateau is also what? It is essentially extension of the Satpura range. So all of these are extension of the Satpura range. Although the highest peak is lying in Mahadev Hills, in general the height of the Satpura declines from west towards east. Also, you know, as you go towards east, they are made up of crystalline rocks, but because it is from here that lava forming the Malwa plateau had flown, so the western part of Satpura are covered with lava. Okay, so that is all which is about the Satpura range. Then coming to the Deccan basaltic plateau or the Maharashtra plateau, we know that this Deccan basaltic plateau is essentially what? It is the lava plateau, and it was formed from reunion hotspot volcanism as India was passing over to from over this reunion hotspot, and in this there is presence of the ridge and valley topography. We have seen this ridge and valley topography before, it was like this, but the reverse erosion had cut these kind of valleys here. So there is Ajanta, Satmala, Balaghat and Harishchand ranges. So you can see Ajanta, Satmala, Balaghat and Harishchand ranges. These are the ridges which are separated by valleys. These valleys have been formed by river erosion. There is also, so there is several residual hills. These are Ajanta, Satmala, Balaghat, Harishchand, all of these are residual hills. We have seen that these are also referred to as Deccan traps. I have explained you that their height declines in a step-like manner. So that is why it is trap. Trap is a step-like landscape, Trappean landscape. We also know that this Kathiawar Peninsula is the extension of the Maharashtra plateau because lava was very hot. So it was able to flow towards west as well as towards north. So Kathiawar is the extension of it, where what has happened? The rivers like Sabarmati, Mahi has eroded and removed the rocks which are located in between. Also there has been subsidence of land here. Okay. So that is why now it is separated from the main Maharashtra plateau. Then coming to Karnataka plateau, we know Karnataka plateau is also a very old plateau of India with height ranging from 600 to 900 meters. There are two parts, the northern and the higher part is referred to as Malnad, and Malnad is essentially the one which is the higher part up to 900 meters. Here lots of ridge and valleys are present and it is also greater, more forested. Maidan is the southern part of the Maharashtra plateau where Bangalore, Mysuru, all those areas are essentially located. So its average height is lower. It is a rolling plateau. That means it is undulating rolling. Ridge and valley will be like this. This is the rolling topography. So it is a rolling plateau essentially, and again because of this factor, this is more suitable for habitation. This is the reason why it is more densely populated part. So that is the Karnataka plateau. Then coming to the Telangana and Rayalaseema plateau, these are also old plateaus which are extension of the, in a way, Rayalaseema is a kind of extension of the Karnataka plateau itself. So if you talk about their average height is just 500 to 600 meters. Important thing to know about them, they are semi-arid because they fall under the both rain shadow effect of both eastern and the western Ghats. Then if you talk about western Ghats, remember I had told you that western Ghats are also escarpments which are very continuous from north to south and act as a perfect water divide. Okay, so that is the western Ghats. And western Ghats, we have they are escarpment. That means the western slope is very steep while the eastern slopes of the western Ghats is essentially gentle. We have seen that they have been formed as the land to the west subsided, leading to their formation. If you talk about their these western Ghats, we know that their height essentially in the north is they are higher 1500 meters. Then they decline towards south first. Near Goa, their height reaches to around 900 meters, and then what happens? They suddenly rise in the southern hill complex, reaching to a height of about 2700 meters of height. Okay, so that is the topography of the Western Ghats. The highest peak of the Western Ghats, we know it is Anaimudi, which is located in the Anaimalai hills. Doda Beta, if you talk about, is the highest peak of the Nilgiri hills. Okay, so you know here you can see that this is Nilgiri hills and Doda Beta is located in Nilgiri hills. This is Anaimalai hills, and here you will be finding that the Anaimudi, which is around 2695 meters, is essentially located. So Anaimudi is the highest peak of the Western Ghats. Northern part of Western Ghats also see here peaks like Kalsubai 1646, Mahabaleshwar 1438 meters, it is located. Okay, so in the north they are higher, their height gradually declines south and then again rises. So that is what we have seen with respect to the Western Ghats. Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, we also know they meet near the Nilgiri hills. So you can see that it is here the Western and the Eastern Ghats are meeting in the Nilgiri hills. That is what you have to remember. Then we have also seen that there are 4 passes in the Western Ghats. There is Bor Ghat, which connects Mumbai and Pune. There is Thal Ghat, which connects Mumbai and Nasik. There is Pal Ghat which connects Chennai and Kochi. Then there is Shenkotta Gap which connects Madurai to Kottayam city of Kerala. Okay, so there is, you see here is your Mumbai, and can you see this Nasik? So it is connected with here actually your, if you talk about in this part actually, here actually it is not there. So you can see here is that Thal Ghat where it is located. Similarly, if you talk about it is connected with here, there is presence of the Bor Ghat. Bor Ghat here is present. This is the Thal Ghat which is present. And if you talk about, there is, if you talk about the Palakkad Gap, which is essentially, you can see it is connecting Kochi to Chennai. So here essentially lies the Palakkad Gap. You can see actually it is here Coimbatore. It is connecting Coimbatore to Kochi. So here lies a very big gap, that is the Palakkad Gap, and you can see that through Madurai to the Kottayam city, here in the Cardamom lies the Shenkotta Gap is lying. So these are the four major passes if you talk about which are present in the Western Ghats. Then Eastern Ghats, important thing about the Western Ghats was that Western Ghats are not fold mountains, they simply represent a higher edge of the plateau. On the other hand, the Eastern Ghats, we have seen that they are old fold mountains formed somewhere around 1.7 to 1.6 billion years ago. And mountainous character, however, because they are very old, they have been mostly eroded. Mountainous character of these is only visible in their northern part where there is presence of northern Sarkars, where the highest peak is Mahendragiri. Okay, but again we find that this is not the highest point. I have talked about that highest points are the flat areas, tableland type of landscapes which are present here. Okay, so that is the case. Then if you talk about true mountainous character is only there in southern part, what is happening, you can see that the river erosion has divided them into number of hills, isolated hills like Nallamala, Penaru river is dividing it from Palkonda range. You can see there is Palar river which is dividing this Javadi hills and Palkonda Chevroy hills. So several of these it has been dissected through the river erosion. If you talk about the Eastern Ghats, their altitude continuously declines from north to south. So in the north they are over 1500 meters, in the southern part they just become 200 meter. Also one thing you can see that Western Ghats are almost parallel to the coast. Eastern Ghats are, unlike Western Ghats, they are not entirely parallel to the coast. Only northern Sarkars can be seen as the one part of Eastern Ghat which is parallel to the coastline. Okay, so that is the case of Eastern Ghats. Then coming to the eastern plateaus, Bastar and Dantkaranya uplands, these represent old plateau surfaces. Average relief is 600 to 900 meter is the average height. And very importantly, it is highly forested area, has several minerals including iron and bauxite is the primary minerals which are found here. Then Chhattisgarh, we have seen that Chhattisgarh basin is a fort-like basin which is present, and it is surrounded on number of areas. You can see this is the Chhattisgarh and it is almost surrounded from the west. There is, you can see Maikal range is located here, Amarkantak plateau and Maikal range. On the north there is, you can see Ramgarh hills is located here, and north east there is Garjat hills are present here. Towards, if you talk about the eastern parts, there is the northern Sarkars which are present here, and towards south they gradually rise in the Dantkaranya uplands and the Bastar plateau. So they are like a fort, and you can see Mahanadi and its tributaries are essentially draining this area. Indravati is another area which is draining in this region. Okay, so that is basically the case of Chhattisgarh basin which is present here. So that is all the things you have to remember. Then coming to Baghelkhand plateau. So we know that here lies the Baghelkhand plateau, you can see, and Baghelkhand plateau is very quite close, you can see, to the Kaimur hills. Okay, so if you talk about the Baghelkhand plateau, It is also an old plateau surface. In the north, it is bounded by zone, and in the south, you will find lots of ridges and valleys made up of sandstone and limestone are found. Its height is very variable. It ranges from 150 to 1200 meters, and it forms water divide between the Son and the Mahanadi rivers. Structurally, it is very similar to the Vindhyan upland. So, it looks like with the formation of the Son Rift Valley, it got separated from the Vindhyan mountains. In the past, it was just part of the Vindhyan mountains. So, structurally, it is separated from Vindhyas by the Son Rift Valley. Then, if you talk about Chota Nagpur Plateau, we know that Chota Nagpur Plateau is also an old plateau of the Indian Peninsula, and it is divided. It has three parts. The Chota Nagpur Plateau, the higher part, although it is not so much bigger in size, it is Hazaribagh Plateau. Then the larger part, which is the Ranchi Plateau, and if you talk about, there is the Rajmahal Hills. So Hazaribagh Plateau is the higher but less extensive. Ranchi Plateau, this is the Ranchi Plateau, and Ranchi Plateau is extensive but not as high as Hazaribagh Plateau. Rajmahal Hills are, or Rajmahal Hills essentially, Rajmahal uplands are formed as a result of hotspot volcanism which occurred from a hotspot, Kargolian hotspot. And it is here the highest peak of Chota Nagpur Plateau, Mount Parasnath, is essentially located. Okay, so all these facts you have to remember about Chota Nagpur Plateau. Remember, I have also told you that here flat-topped hills where there is presence of laterite soils is present. Also, laterite soils here associated with bauxite ore is also found, and these are referred to as the patlands. Okay, particularly in Hazaribagh and the Ranchi Plateau, they are very, very common. Okay, so all these things we have talked about. Then comes the Meghalaya Plateau. We know that Meghalaya Plateau, although lying in the northeast India and separated from the Bengal plains from the main peninsula, it is part of, it is just outlier of the peninsular plateau. So here what happens, it is believed that it is simply extension of the, it was extension of the Eastern Ghats. If you talk about, it is separated by, it was separated from the main peninsula by the development of Garo Rajmahal Gap. So here lies the Rajmahal Hill, here lies the Garo Hills. So here the land got subsided during the formation of Himalayas, we have seen, which is this. In this Garo Rajmahal Gap, what happened? Later the Ganga and Brahmaputra rivers have deposited huge amount of sediments, leading to the formation of the Bengal plains. Okay, average relief of this plateau ranges, it is quite high. So its relief ranges between 1200 to 1500 meters. So in a way, it is the highest plateau of the peninsula. Main part, if you talk about, include the Garo, Khasi, Jaintia, Mikir. Here, if you talk about, there is also Rengma Hills are present here. So these are the 6 part of these. Important thing is that these southern slopes are very, very steep, and here, you know, the rainiest parts like Mausin Ram, Cherrapunji, etc. are located. If you talk about, the northern slopes are comparatively gentle. Because of the Meghalaya Plateau, this Assam basin, the Brahmaputra basin, lies in the rain shadow effect of them. Essentially, they form water divide between the Brahmaputra river and this Barak or the Meghna river. Okay, so that is what we talk about the peninsular plateau. Then moving on to another part of peninsular plateau is the coastal plains. So it is flanked by, you can see coastal plains very clearly. The eastern coastal plains are wider, the western coastal plains are narrower. And if we talk about, first difference between them is that manner of formation. We have seen eastern coast is emergent coastline while western coast is submergent coastline. So I have already explained you what is emergent and what is submergent. Then width, if you talk about, very clearly west coast is narrow because it is submergent, and east coast, because it is emergent, it is wider. Nature of coastline, west coastline is indented, it is highly indented, while east coastline is more smooth. So reason, we have seen that west coastline, there are a number of short swift rivers emerging from the western Ghats, and they are mainly forming estuaries, and that is why it has become so much indented. Also, indentation is related to the subsidence of land along this area. And along the east coast, you will finding that there is large rivers draining and forming deltas, so it has a more smooth coastline compared to the indentations which are present along the west coast. However, because of the indentations along the west coast, we know that more natural harbors are present along the west coast, and thus the potential to form ports is also present there. So, more natural harbors and large ports are found along the western coastline. Also, we know that western coast has less depositional feature than the eastern coast. So, number of sand dunes, good and wide beaches, mud flats, spits and bars, you will be finding these are greater along the eastern coast. If you talk about east coast, we know that large rivers are draining and they are carrying lots of amount of sediments. Along the west coast, we know there is parallel drainage which is existing. Very short swift rivers are emerging from western Ghats and debouching directly into the Arabian Sea. Also, west coast, we know it is mainly affected by southwest monsoon winds and receive very heavy precipitation. While in the if you talk about east coast, particularly the southern east coast, that is the Coromandel coast, it is affected, more influenced by the northeast monsoon winds. Also, we know with respect to hazards there is difference. East coast is more hazard prone, whether it is tsunami or whether if you talk about the cyclones. West coast proneness to hazard is lesser than the east coast, although we know that it is not free from such hazards. Okay, so that is the case of these. Then coming to the Himalayas. Himalayas, we already know that Himalayas are young fold mountains, and these young fold mountains have been mainly built in the tertiary period, and if you talk about through the continent collision which has occurred between the Indian peninsula and Eurasia. Okay. And as the Gondwana land broke through, India began to drift northward and it essentially collided into Eurasia, leading to the formation of the Himalayas. Remember, I have told you that such continent collision has two parts. One is, first it will be ocean continent, where in case of here the Tethys sea floor was colliding and subducting beneath the Eurasia. This led to the formation of first mountain ranges, which are, we know that, are volcanic arc, which is the essentially the trans-Himalayan ranges like Karakoram. Then the sediments which were deposited in the Tethys Sea, we have seen that they would also be deformed and folded into mountains. That led to formation of the Tethys Himalayas. Finally, there was also, as continent in the second phase, as continent collision occurred, there was first the formation of Tethys Himalayas. Because the process of collision has continued, there has been three ranges which have been formed further: the main Himalayas, the middle Himalayas, and if you talk about the Shivalik Himalayas. So, all this I have explained you in very great detail. So, you know very well, there is the Tibetan Plateau. Then can you see this? There is Kailash range, which is an example of trans-Himalayan range. Okay. Then if you talk about, there is this Brahmaputra valley, which if you remember we talked about, which is flowing in the ITS Z in the Sangpo Sucha zone, which represents the boundary between the Indian peninsula and if you talk about the Eurasian plate. So, you can understand this is the reason why the when Indus is originating, it first flows northwestward, and why it is flowing parallel to the Himalayan mountains. Same thing is with the Brahmaputra, parallel to the Himalayan mountains. Okay. Then as you go inside, you will be finding there is presence of Tethyan Himalayas. Like here you will find there is the Zaskar ranges which are present. Then there is greater or inner Himalayas. There is no boundary between Zaskar and the great Himalayas, but there is boundary between the great Himalayas and the middle or the lesser Himalayas, that is referred to as MCT, main central thrust. Then there is the middle Himalayas. Boundary is, the southern boundary is formed by MBT, main boundary thrust, and thereafter lies the Shivalik or the outer Himalayas. Then there is another fault line, thrust fault line or reverse fault line, that is HFF, Himalayan front fault, and after that lies the Indo-Gangetic plains. So, this is how we know, we have seen that Himalayas have been essentially formed. Now, if you talk about the main ranges and their characteristics, one we are saying is the trans-Himalayan ranges. Mainly the Karakoram and the Kailash ranges are essentially part of this trans-Himalayan ranges. The average relief of these ranges is 4,500 meters, and their width ranges between 35 to 40 kilometers, and they are continuous from Pakistan to Arunachal Pradesh. If you talk about their structure of rocks, they are mainly made up of volcanic rocks. Remember, I told you that they are basically, they represent volcanic arcs. Okay, and they contain several high peaks, like the highest mountain, second highest mountain peak K2 is located in the Karakoram range. Okay, so most of these peaks are essentially the volcanic peak batholiths which are located there. Also, because they are lying in higher latitude and they are very high, they have extensive glacier. In fact, outside the polar area, the largest glaciers we have seen are found here, like some of the names you should remember, like Batura, Biafo, and Siachen. So several of these, because sometimes UPSC gives some name and asks you what are these. Okay, so all of these will be common things, something common like Batura, Biafo, Baltoro, Siachen. All these are the glaciers which are found here in this Karakoram region. Okay, so that is there the case, and we know that south of this lies the Indus-Sangpo Suture zone, which represents the boundary zone between Indian Peninsula and the Tibet. Okay, so that is the Karakoram range. You can see Karakoram range, and here lies the K2. There is Ladakh range. Then you can see south of this there is this Indus river, which is essentially draining. So this is Indus river is draining into ITSZ, Indus-Sangpo Suture zone. South of that you can see this Zaskar mountains are located. These are your Tethys Himalayas, which we are going to see the next. So Tethys Himalayas formed when there was continent-continent collision occurred. They are formed from the sediments which were deposited in the Tethys seafloor, and their average relief is 4,300 meters, average width is around 40 kilometers. They are sedimentary rocks, mainly made up of sedimentary rocks, which have escaped metamorphism. It is still a puzzle for the scientists how they have escaped metamorphism, and this escaping metamorphism means that in them marine fossils are still found. Okay, because these are sedimentary rocks which have been formed in the marine area. They also represent strongly folded zones, and there is no clear-cut boundary between them and the Great Himalayas, as I told you. Then comes the Great Himalayas. We know that Great Himalayas have been formed from the rocks belonging to the peninsula. Okay, so the peninsular crust folded, leading to the formation of Great Himalayas between 24 to 17 million years ago. South of it, we know that there is development of a fault line, that is main central thrust. These are the highest mountain range of the world, where average height is 6,000 meters. Very few mountain peaks are above 6,000 meters outside the Himalayas. Width is 25 kilometers, and they are remarkably very continuous. Tallest peaks of the world are found here, like Mount Everest, Kanchenjunga, etc. And as I said, main central thrust lies to the south of this zone. Okay, mainly it is made up of crystalline rocks. Mainly the granite and gneisses form their core, although there is some sedimentary outliers also present in them. Then comes the Lesser Himalayas, and we know that the case of Lesser Himalayas, the formation occurred somewhere around 11 to 7 million years ago. We have seen that they are formed because of in the same manner as if you talk about the main Himalayas, that is from the folding of the crust belonging to the peninsula. It is believed that this was the phase of the formation of the Himalayas when the collisions were most intense, and this intense collision have given rise to discontinuous ranges of the middle Himalayas. So if you talk about this discontinuous ranges of the middle Himalayas, you can see that there is presence of this Pir Panjal range, which is one. Then here you will be finding there is Dhauladhar range, here Masuri range, there is Nag Tibba range. All of these are essentially what? They are part of the middle Himalayas. So they are broken. They are not continuous like the Great Himalayas or the Shivalik Himalayas. Okay. And reason I told you that the collisions during this period were so much stronger that they couldn't remain that. South of this, these mountains is location of the main boundary fault or the main boundary thrust. Average altitude is 3,600 to 4,200 meters, while width is 80 kilometers in the west, while it narrows down in the east. If you talk about, they are made up of very similar type of rocks like the main Himalayas, and these rocks mostly are igneous and metamorphic, and thus they are unfossiliferous rocks. We have also learned one more thing, that many of the peaks which are present here, they represent napes, which who have their source region or the root zone in the Great Himalayas. So this represents the kind of intense collision which would have occurred during this period. So that is the case of your the lesser Himalayas or the middle Himalayas. Now coming to the sub-Himalayan zone or the Shivalik, the boundary that is present between Shivalik and the middle Himalayas is referred to as the main boundary thrust, MBT, as we talked about. MBT is not continuous, it is discontinuous like the middle Himalayas. In this valleys, in this, if you talk about fault line, there is presence of tectonic valleys which are referred to as dunes. Okay, so various dunes, you know, like Dehradun, Patli Dun, so several such valleys, these are tectonic valleys which separate the middle Himalayas from the Shivalik Himalayas. Now, if you talk about Shivalik Himalayas, remember we have seen that once the Himalayas were formed, because of the loading which occurred, there was bending of the crust, and this bending of the crust led to formation of a four-deep, a depression at the foothills of the Himalayas. In this depression, newly formed rivers, they deposited lots of sediments, and that led to formation of four-deep plains. So rivers coming from peninsula as well as Himalayas deposited large amount of sediments, and first these sediments were deposited in marine condition, and then they became freshwater conditions. So in this manner, these four deep plains were formed. Further later, what happened? There was development of northern part of this got deformed and got converted to the Shivalik mountains. And towards south, there was development of another fault line which we call it as the Himalayan front fault or the Himalayan front thrust. So that is how they have been formed, we have seen. And if you talk about their average altitude is just 1300 meter, width is around 45 kilometer in the west, but they become very narrow 8 kilometer in the east. Mainly they are made up of sedimentary formation. As I told you, they contain fossils of both marine and freshwater origin. Okay, they are very remarkably continuous except an 80 kilometer gap which exists in the Sikkim from where the Tista river is flowing. I have told you about the tectonic valleys which are present and which are referred to as the dunes, which are located north of these mountains between the middle and Himalayas and these Shivalik Himalayas. Okay, and towards south, their foothills are covered with a transition zone. Remember, we have talked about the Bhavar zone. So that is the case of these. And we also know the peculiar characteristics of Himalayas. So syntaxial bends, we have studied about the syntaxial bends. So remember, syntaxial bends are the hairpin like bend, the arc shape of the Himalayas, and these bends, these are referred to as the syntaxial bend. We have seen that such syntaxial bends are result of the fact that when peninsula was penetrating into Asia, there was hard outliers in the form of Aravalli and the Eastern Ghats and the Shillong Plateau, which penetrated deeper into Asia, and that has given this arc shape and presence of the syntaxial bends. So that is the reason for this syntaxial bends. Difference between Western and Eastern Himalayas also is key feature. Western Himalayas are less higher and they are wider. Their height increases more step-like. Eastern Himalayas are more higher and they are narrow, and they are almost wall-like. Their height increases suddenly. So reason we have seen that in case of, because Indian Peninsula, when it was moving north, it was also taking anti-clockwise turn. So the anti-clockwise turn was taking place. There is greater convergence in the east than in the west. So when it was taking an anti-clockwise turn, what happened? Some kind of divergence would have been created in the west, which created the wide zone of the Himalayas in the west. While because convergence is very strong in the east, we know that here they have become essentially narrow mountains. Okay, so that is the case of the difference between Western and Eastern Himalayas. Also, we know they are diachronous. That means their origin is different. Western Himalayas were formed earlier. Eastern Himalayas were formed later because of the anti-clockwise turn, and first the western tip of peninsula crashing into Asia, remember, and thus because Western Himalayas are older, they have been more eroded compared to the Eastern Himalayas. That is also why they are lower. Also, we have seen that Himalayas are the tallest mountain of the world. Nowhere in the world you find so much tall mountains. So primary reason we have seen is the support which is provided by the median mass of the Tibetan plateau, which allows such high Himalayas to be present. It provides stability to these Himalayas. So that is the case. Then comes the Indo-Gangetic plains or the northern Indian plains. So we know that there is northern Indian plains which are lying to the south of the Himalayan front fault, which separate the Shivalik Himalayas from the Indo-Gangetic plains. Both of these were part of the same 4D plains, although the northern part, it got folded into the Shivalik. So it became Shivalik. Here lies the rest of the Indo-Gangetic plains. So we know that Indo-Gangetic plains have been formed from the filling by sediments or filling of sediments brought by rivers into the Himalayan 4D. Structurally, we know that they are divided into, from relief perspective, they are divided into 4 zones: Bhabar, Terai, Bhangar and Khadar. Bhangar and Khadar are floodplain. Bhabar represent the alluvial zone and Terai represent a marshy zone. So Bhabar, you know, we have seen that as the rivers are coming from the Himalayan reaches into plains, the slope declines and thus their ability to carry sediments decline and they are forming alluvial fans. Merger of these several alluvial fans has led to formation of this Bhabar. It is essentially a 7 to 15 kilometer wide linear zone adjacent to this foothills of the Shivalik. Also, because it is made up of coarser sediments like cobbles and pebbles and some boulders as well, it has very high porosity, due to which what happens, the streams here disappear because they begin to flow beneath the sediments or the rubble of sediments. Here, because the rivers are entering into the plains, these areas are also referred to as dwars or the dwar. Okay, so that is the Bhabar. We know that Tarai is, as the rivers enter into out of the Bhabar zone, they enter into a very, very flat area and the water thus spreads, leading to creation of a marshy zone which is referred to as a Tarai. And this marshy zone is, its width ranges from 15 to 30 kilometers. If you talk about, it is an area of excessive dampness and humidity. It is highly forested area, including the Bhabar. And if you talk about, it is more developed in the eastern section. I have told you why, because eastern section receives heavy precipitation. We have also seen that Bhangar and Khadar are essentially what these are, the flood plains of the rivers, the Himalayan rivers which are flowing in this area. Bhangar, we know that it is the old flood plain. It is located higher and it is darker in color and it has more numerous conchers, calcium aggregates which are found. It is essentially a dry point where villages in the Indo-Gangetic plains are located, because it lies above the flood levels, the normal flood levels of these rivers. Okay, only in extreme floods some water would be reaching here. Khadar, on the other hand, is located at lower level. It represents the contemporary or the present flood plains, and it is, because it is present, it is made up of lighter alluvium, color is light, it has lesser conchers present in it. Every year there is floods which are coming and which renew the fertility of this area, and thus it is agriculturally very, very important for India. Then if you talk about regional division can also be done, and we know that there is Punjab plains which is made up of the Panjnad rivers. Then beyond that lies the Gangetic plains, which is further divided into the upper Ganga, middle Ganga and the lower Gangetic plains, and then there is Brahmaputra plains. Also there is presence of this Rajasthan plains. Okay, so if you talk about here the Satluj Yamuna plains, the Punjab plains, if you talk about, they are made up of doabs, which is the area between two rivers, the interfluves, and the 5 rivers that we are talking about. So the doab, which is area located between Beas and Satluj, is Bisht, Beas and Ravi is Bari, Ravi and Chenab is Rechna, Chenab and Jhelum is Chud, and Chenab plus Jhelum plus Indus is Sindh Sagar Doab, or it is also referred to as the Thar desert region. Not Thar, Thal, L. Okay, so that is basically the case of this Satluj Yamuna plain. We have also seen that the northern part of this plains, if you talk about, here there is lots of gullying and erosion has taken place, because very swift rivers coming from the Shivalik debouch into this area, leading to formation of lots of ravines and gullies. Okay, and locally I have told you that these dry ravines and gullies are referred to as the chos. Okay. The khadar of this area is also referred to as betland, B-E-T, betland. Okay. Then coming to the Gangetic plain, so as I told you, the upper Gangetic plain has three parts in it, and if you talk about these three parts of the upper Gangetic plain, there is, you can see that here there is this Ganga Yamuna Doab region, there is, if you talk about, there is this Ganga Yamuna Doab region which is present, there is here lies, this is the Awadh plains region, and this is basically your Rohilkhand region. Okay. So that is basically the case of the three divisions which are present in it. So upper Gangetic plains, it is divided into, as I told you, the Ganga Yamuna Doab, which lies in semi-arid and sub-humid zone, and here very important feature is presence of prominent Bhangar terraces are present here. Also Aeolian sandy ridges locally referred to as Bhur are present here, made up of sand ridges are present here. Rohilkhand is the second part, and large part is made up of Bhabar and Tarai. It is located towards north. Awadh plains, if you talk about the presence of here, extensive Khadar regions are found. Then as you go towards middle Gangetic plains, which is eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar mainly, you will be finding that here there is extensive Khadar land is present. The river here resorts to very high meandering. This area is very, very famous for flooding. Also several oxbow lakes are present here, like for example, one oxbow lake, if you remember, I told you, the Kanwar Tal. Okay, these oxbow lakes are locally here referred to as the Tal, and near Patna you will find the largest oxbow lake of Asia, that is Kanwar Tal. Then lower Gangetic plain has two parts. The northern part, if you talk about, in case of the lower Gangetic plain, you see this northern part is essentially made up of Bhabar and the Tarai region, while southern part, if you talk about, it is mainly what? It is mainly delta region. Okay, so that is the lower Gangetic plains. It is made up of both distributaries of Ganga and Brahmaputra. Very important thing about here is in the lower part, that is in the delta region, several riverine islands are present. These are locally referred to as the chars. Okay. When it comes to the Brahmaputra plains, we know that Brahmaputra plains are very, very narrow plains. And if you talk about these narrow plains, in these narrow plains, what we find is there is presence of the Brahmaputra river, which is highly braided river, and their narrowness actually is related with the fact that towards their north there is Himalayas, towards their south there is Meghalaya plateau. Okay, so if you talk about these, this is the characteristic of the Brahmaputra plain. Also, if you talk about the northern part, there is extensive Bhabar and Tarai, which is present in the northern part of the plains. In this, this is the area where lots of flooding is taking place annually, and it is very frequently affected by the floods. Then coming to the Thar desert region is, we know that it is a desert area, and if you talk about this desert area, one reason we have seen that it is desert because the Aravalli mountains are lying parallel to the direction of the southwest monsoon wind. So there is no orographic precipitation taking place. There is nothing to intercept the winds and cause orographic precipitation. That makes this area desert area. Also, we know during the Himalayan region there was re-upliftment, or during the Himalayan upliftment there was re-upliftment of the Aravalli mountains. And this re-upliftment has what it done? It has disoriented the rivers which were flowing towards this region. So it is believed that earlier from the Himalayas, originating from Himalayas, there were several rivers which were flowing in this region. So presence of rivers led to presence of, if you talk about, comparatively less dryness in the region, and agriculture etc. could be performed. But because of the re-upliftment of Aravalli, what happened? There was, in fact, the rivers were dismembered, and thus what happened here now, these rivers which were flowing, they got dried because their source was cut off. And like for example, Ghaggar river dry channels can still be seen. Mythical Saraswati river is believed to have been flowing in this area. Okay, so that is basically the general description of the Thar Desert. And if you talk about the Thar Desert, is divided into two parts. The western part is referred to as the Great Indian Desert, and the eastern part is semi-arid tropical land, which is referred to as the Rajasthan Bagar. I have already told you. So the western part and eastern part, they are divided by the 26 centimeter ISO height line. The western Rajasthan, which is the Great Indian Desert, or also referred to as the Marusthali, it has two parts. The eastern part of it is a rocky desert, while the western part is covered with sand dunes. Okay. On the other hand, if you talk about the Rajasthan Bagar, which is the semi-arid tropical steppe region actually, if you talk about it, the northern part, you will find that there is presence of dry beds of Ghaggar still present here. If you talk about the southern part, there is presence of Luni and its tributary. This area is very, very important for agriculture in case of Rajasthan. So that is basically the case of the Indo-Gangetic plains. Now coming to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands of India, we know that Andaman and Nicobar Islands, we have seen that they represent basically what? They represent the accretionary wedge. So the main islands are accretionary wedge made up of sediments. So these are sedimentary mountains which are believed to be the extension of Arcaniuma mountains of Myanmar. So through this Cocos and Preparis, which are belonging to Myanmar, they are seen to be connected to the Arcaniuma mountains of Myanmar. Okay, here you can see that there is also this Barren Island and Narcondam Island is also present. So actually there is another arc which is present here. So this is the accretionary wedge. This is essentially the island arc which is present. At two places this island arc has risen above the sea level, that is the Narcondam Island. I have explained you how they have been formed. So that is the case of these islands. Barren Island is the active volcano which is present here. Narcondam is basically, if you talk about, it is a kind of dormant volcano which has not erupted for long period of time. So again, you look into these. If you talk about the Andaman islands, they are separated from Coco Channel from the Coco Islands of Myanmar. Okay. Then there is Duncan Passage, that is important to remember. So Duncan Passage separates the Little Andaman from the rest of Andaman, that is the South Andaman. Port Blair, the capital, is essentially located on South Andaman. Okay. So that is basically some of the key, if you talk about facts you have to remember. Then 10-degree channel separates the Andaman group of islands from the Nicobar group of islands. And south of this 10-degree channel first lies the Car Nicobar. The largest island is the Great Nicobar, which is the southernmost island of this chain of island. And this Great Nicobar is separated by Great Channel from the Indonesian islands. Okay. So this is your Andaman and Nicobar islands. And Andaman Nicobar we know because these are mostly sedimentary in nature, made up of sandstones and limestones. They are mountainous in character, if you talk about, and essentially this mountainous character of these islands, if you talk about, thus they have very narrow coastal plains, and particularly on the windward slopes you will be finding that there is also presence of the fringing reefs which are present there. There are lots of good harbors, natural harbors present here. Okay. So that is the case of this. And general relief, if you talk about, ranges between 200 to 500 meter, and highest peak is the Saddle Peak, which is located in North Andaman. Its height is around 730 meters. So that is the case of the Andaman and Nicobar. Lakshadweep Islands, if you talk about, they are made up of two group of islands, and one is, if you talk about, the Amindvi Islands. So first group of islands, and there is the Kannanur group of islands. So there are two group of islands which are present here. So Amindvi and Kannanur group. One small island which is very far away from the main Lakshadweep, Minicoy, it is separated from it by the 9-degree channel separate from rest of the Lakshadweep. So it is very lonely island of the Lakshadweep. We know that Lakshadweep are essentially atolls which are located on the Lakshadweep Chagos Ridge, that is the mid-Indian ridge, branch of a mid-Indian ridge. Okay, so they are basically what? They are atoll islands. I have told you that how these atoll islands are formed. So suppose there is a ridge present. Over this ridge, this kind of corals have been formed. If suppose this is the low tide level, so corals are present here. Waves would have done what? Waves have deposited lots of calcareous matter and sand in one part of the island or this atolls, and this is basically the Lakshadweep island. So most of these Lakshadweep islands are present here. Where this deposition is not present, you can see that such submerged reefs are still present, like Bitra, Bangur, Sherambiani, Peramul. All these reefs are still present. So parts of these reefs you will find that there this deposition has taken place of sand and calcareous matter, leading to formation of the Lakshadweep island. Thus we have seen that there is gentle slope towards the west of these islands, where also the shallow lagoon is lying here. You can see there is shallow lagoon lying. The eastern seaboard of these islands has a very steep slope. Okay, so that is the case. They are very low. Their height is just 5 meters above the sea level, and thus are very much threatened with the sea level rise. Okay. Another feature of the Lakshadweep is they hardly have soil. They mainly sandy calcareous soil is found here, so not very significant from the perspective of agriculture. Other islands I have told you, east coast islands like New Moor, Sagar Island, Short Wheeler Island, Short and Wheeler Island in the Mahanadi Chilka region, Shri Harikota Island if you talk about. All of these, if you talk about, are basically what? The east coast island are depositional islands. So they represent sandbars. So because along the east coast, lots of large rivers are bringing large amount of sediments. These sediments are getting redeposited by the work of the waves and tides. That leads to formation of the sandbars and barrier islands, and these are essentially forming these islands. Okay. These are also very low islands whose height we have seen is not much above the sea level, just on an average 5 meters above the sea level. So again, there can be lots of disasters like cyclone hazards, etc. They can cause lots of alteration in these islands. West coast islands, I have told you, they are basically what? They are continental island. We remember we talked about that how the intervening land between the peninsula and these islands subsided, due to which they became essentially island. How we know that they are continental? Because their lithology is very similar to the nearby coast. Like for example, if you talk about, we have seen Diu is basaltic, Kathiawar nearby, Mumbai is again basaltic, Pigeon Cock which is near Karnataka plateau has, if you talk about granitic to gneissic. Okay, these islands, most of these are hilly and undulating. One more type of islands which are present in India are riverine islands, formed in many of the rivers of the north, particularly Ganga and Brahmaputra. Like the largest riverine island, Majuli, is located in Brahmaputra. But even in southern rivers like in Kaveri, the Sri Rangapatnam island is a riverine island. So these are the islands of India that you have to essentially remember. Okay, so that is the case of the islands of India.